seekers are running for their lives. They're escaping, usually with just their life, and escaping to this country. And then when they arrive here, they ask for asylum. They basically ask for safe haven. And they have to start the whole process of being granted asylum, of being interviewed and found worthy of not being sent home here in this country.
I am talking with Andrea Hewitt from Dignity in Asylum. Dignity in Asylum is a nonprofit organization that provides safe transitional housing and support for asylum seekers, refugees, unaccompanied minors, and people who have been granted asylum in the United States. So, Andrea, thanks for being here.
You're very welcome.
Andrea, tell me, how did your organization come about?
My friend and I started Dignity in Asylum 2 years ago because we had both been volunteering with asylum seekers for many, many years and realized how precarious their housing situation in particular is. And that's what motivated us to found Dignity in Asylum.
That is very interesting. I have read that your mission is to provide safe housing and support for asylum seekers. How often do you get new applicants, and how do they come to you?
We usually have a wait list. We work very closely with the Center for Refugee Health and Human Rights in Boston. They're a small nonprofit organization based at the Boston Medical Center. And they work with trauma survivors, they work with torture victims, provide mental health care, and they provide medical care and mental health care, but they cannot help with legal support or with housing. So they refer their clients to us when they realize that their housing is really in jeopardy or that they're about to be homeless.
Are there any social support systems in the U.S. available for those seeking asylum?
Very little. There's really a big discrepancy. When refugees come, there are a lot of resettlement agencies. So in the greater Boston area, there's the International Institute and Catholic Charities. In New York City, International Rescue Committee. So there are a lot of organizations that help resettle refugees. And it's still a hard, tough process. Asylum seekers really fall through all the cracks. There is nothing in place for them. If they don't find people who are willing to support them, they're really in the street. They don't have a right to legal support. They don't have any right to government support. They can't even get food stamps. They really depend on the mercy of strangers. If they're lucky enough and have friends or family members here, they usually help. But if they don't, then they're really on their own. And there are a number of organizations like the Center for Refugee Health and Human Rights. They help with healthcare and mental health care, counseling, casework. There is the PAIR Project, that's the Political Asylum Immigration Representation. It's a group of lawyers in Boston who find pro bono attorneys who will represent people seeking asylum. But for housing, there is no government agency that would provide housing. And in the greater Boston area, our organization is one of two who tries to find housing for people seeking asylum.
So it's a very focused...
It's a very focused organization, and even though we've realized that once you provide housing, it's very comprehensive, because once you house people, you really deal with everything in their lives. They live in, at the moment, we rent 4 different apartments in Concord, Maynard, and Acton, and we are housing 10 people. And of course, you get to see every aspect of their lives, and from the legal to health to just loneliness, because when people come here and apply for asylum, they're not allowed to work. So from the time that people apply for asylum until the date that they get their work authorization, it usually takes at least a year. So during that year, people can't do anything and just have to wait and are in limbo. So it's a very difficult, challenging situation.
What countries do your asylum seekers and refugees come from?
So our guests at the moment are almost all from countries in Africa. So our guests come from Sudan, from Uganda, from Kenya, from Rwanda, from Cameroon, and from the Democratic Republic of Congo.
So mostly sub-Saharan Africa. Mm-hmm. What is the typical age and or background of those that Dignity in Asylum supports? For example, do they come in families? Are they alone? Are they married?
So most of our guests come alone because of the nature of their background, because they really, most of them have already been abducted and imprisoned and tortured and are escaping to save their lives, and have to go through routes where they can't bring family and kids along with them. So most of our guests do have children back home, and most of them also have spouses back home, but we're not able to escape with them. So the average age is around 30. Most of them are relatively young. The majority are college educated because they were change makers in their countries. So when they come here, they can apply for asylum. There are papers to fill out where you describe your persecution history, and you describe why you cannot go back without risking your life. That's the asylum application. In an asylum interview, people will really be asked with the intent to find loopholes where they make mistakes, where the dates are not correct, or where they contradict themselves. So it's a very strict process, and people coming here, because they're often so highly traumatized, when they have to write down their trauma history to be able to then be granted asylum based on what they write, it can be very challenging, because the things that would allow them to be granted asylum are often the most painful things they don't really want to write about. If you have to do all that by yourself without a professional by your side, the chances of then in the interview being granted asylum are much lower. If they don't have a place to stay, they're very often detained, put in prison. So we actually had one of our guests was a young woman who had come, she had passed through the credible fear interview, and then she was detained in a prison in Boston.
Oh dear.
And that's where we interacted with ICE, and her lawyer called us, and we went in, and because we could give them a letter saying we can provide housing for her, then she could be released. So
you've interacted with the jail system?
The jail and the immigration system. They had to let her out on parole into our hands, basically. But in general, we're not interacting directly with them. Our clients or guests, most of them have lawyers, and they will be the ones interacting for the asylum case. So we are really more the day-to-day housing, living, emotional, just sort of regular, daily life that we try to support.
Now about you. What is your vision for your organization in 5 or 10 years from now?
Well, ideally, we would love to continue growing. When we started 2 years ago, we started with 1 3-bedroom apartment so we could house 3 women. And now we have that apartment for 3 women. We just took in a family, a mother with 3 kids, which is very unusual, but we took them in. We have 1 young couple, and they're expecting a baby. Aww. And we have 1 apartment for 2 men. So we grew quite a bit. We are hoping that we continue growing, and there's a trend that more and more pregnant women are coming seeking asylum, and they face even more difficulties because coming here pregnant and then finding yourself homeless in a country where you don't have a support system is even harder. So our hope is that we can house more women with children.
Andrea, I want to thank you for coming here today and talking to me about Dignity in Asylum. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.